The morning in midsummer Miami always starts earlier. In a white mansion in the quiet residential area of Coral Gables, Alexandra Moreno had already done her perfect makeup. Dressed in a sophisticated outfit of a silk blouse and tailored pants. Rushing through the final checks for her cruise. Yes, only the finest champagne. Each glass filled with my success. She was giving instructions over the phone to the cruise company's coordinator, while looking out from the spacious living room's large window at the perfectly maintained garden. The water cascading from the fountain was shimmering rainbow colors under the already blazing sun. The heat in August was so intense that even the residents of Miami felt suffocated. Yes, I have informed the chef. He will allow my mother to use the kitchen to finish her traditional dishes. Alexandra smiled elegantly. Her profile, unmarked by her 35 years, still held the remnants of her top model days. Her stage name from her modeling days, Moreno, had now become a symbol of her brand. Since her debut at 18, she had always aimed for the top. She discarded her real name, climbed the ladder of success with a new one. And now, her company held a firm position in the beauty industry. Really, don't worry. My mother was a top chef in the South. She won't mess up a professional kitchen. In the lounge, numerous awards telling of Alexandra's shining achievements adorned the shelves, an Innovation Award in Cosmetics, Young Entrepreneur Award, and most prominently, the American Beauty Award Gold Shield. After hanging up, she opened her planner. Her schedule was packed for morning, with just a few hours until the cruise departure. She had to handle significant matters for her company. Planning for a new beauty device promotion, scheduling for models in training, and meeting with investors for international expansion. Alexandra. Her husband, Michael Sanders, stood in the entrance in blue scrubs. His calm face showed the fatigue from a night's work in the emergency room. "Do you still have work left?" Alexandra asked him bluntly, her gaze already returning to her planner. "A young doctor called in sick, so I have to go back to the hospital once more. Make sure you're not late for departure." Alexandra responded in a businesslike tone. Michael understood her dedication to her work but couldn't help showing a touch of sadness. Meanwhile, at the edge of the Miami harbor, 12-year-old Joshua Lee gazed at the luxurious cruise ship lit by the morning sun. The skinny boy's presence went unnoticed by the workers at the port. He hadn't eaten since last night. The sound of his growling stomach was drowned out by the waves. Joshua clung to the memory of his mother, who, 4 years earlier, had cooked in their spacious kitchen using traditional tools among the latest kitchen appliances. "Mom, I'll make it, I promise," Joshua murmured to himself. In front of him, the luxurious Ocean Princess was docked. The pure white ship sparkled in the morning sun, with staff already bustling about on the upper deck. The scent of breakfast wafting from inside further stimulated the boy's hunger. Joshua carefully checked his surroundings. The port guards were on their coffee break in the break room. The workers were busy loading cargo. No one was paying him any attention. The boy made up his mind. He would sneak onto the ship. "Sorry, Mom, but I can't just starve to death." Blending with the movements of the workers, he slowly approached the ship. The freight elevator that had been moving frequently could be his way in. Joshua's keen eyes had already calculated his route of entry. Since his mother's death a year ago, he had survived in various ways. Occasionally stealing food from small shops or scavenging leftovers from restaurants. But this luxury cruise was different. There would surely be lavish leftovers for him to find. Near the stairs leading to the deck, Joshua took a deep breath. This was his last chance. If caught, he would be arrested. However, his eyes were filled with determination. His mother's memory gave him the courage to live. At the same time, in a modest single-story home in the outskirts of Miami, Mary Harris had been in the kitchen since early morning. The morning sun shone through the window, illuminating the spotlessly cleaned kitchen counter. Even with the air conditioning, the August heat made cooking a heavy task. "Oh, Charles. Have you already been shopping?" Charles Collins entered the kitchen holding a supermarket paper bag. His posture erect despite his 70 years, but his expression somewhat shadowed. "Yes, I went as soon as the store opened. I've got all the ingredients for the gravy sauce." Mary smiled warmly at her husband. The newlyweds had just begun their life together in this modest home. Charles watched his wife's efficient movements out of the corner of his eye as he unloaded the ingredients from the shopping bag. The kitchen counter was already prepared with ingredients: high-quality ground meat for the meatloaf, fresh potatoes for the mashed potatoes, and the components for key lime pie. Mary had carefully chosen each for recipes passed down through the Harris family. "This meatloaf will have a special herb my mother taught me to use." Mary began to speak nostalgically as she chopped thyme and sage. "In a small town in Georgia, my mother taught cooking to the neighbors. My husband loved this dish," her voice trembled slightly. "Since he passed away 10 years ago, I think of him every time I make it. He was concerned about the family until the end, just like a father should be." Charles listened silently, his eyes seemingly pondering something else. He discreetly reached into the bottom of the shopping bag and slid a small brown paper wrap into his pocket unseen. "This recipe was handed down to my mother by my grandmother when she got married, and I wanted to teach it to Alexandra." Mary's voice sounded a bit lonely. "That girl is always about work, work, work. It's been a long time since we've cooked together. It used to be different." Lost in her memories, Mary expertly mixed the meatloaf ingredients: minced onion, breadcrumbs, eggs, and her special herb mix. "But today is a special day. Surely Alexandra will remember the taste from her childhood." Charles nodded ambiguously to his wife's words and left the kitchen. He went into his study, took out the small paper wrap from his pocket, and hid it deep in a drawer. His expression was marked by a dark resolution. Meanwhile, Mary started preparing the mashed potatoes. As she peeled the potatoes, she spun tales of memories with her daughter. When Alexandra was little, she always wanted to help make the mashed potatoes. She loved mashing them. Mary smiled, but her smile was tinged with a slight sadness. Her daughter now lived in a world far removed from the simple Southern home cooking. The key lime pie used to be a different recipe. As Mary continued, crushing graham crackers, she added, "Pecan pie was the real tradition of the Harris family. But we found out Alexandra was allergic to nuts when she was 5. Since then, key lime pie has been our new tradition." Charles returned from his study and watched his wife's work. His eyes obsessively followed the meatloaf nearing completion. "Just a bit more, and it'll be finished. I'll do the final steps in the kitchen on the ship." Mary gazed lovingly at the traditional dish she was preparing. This recipe, passed down through generations of the Harris family, held meanings far beyond mere cooking methods. It was a bond of family, and a testament to love that transcended generations. However, Mary was unaware that an irreversible shadow was about to fall over this tradition today. Charles returned to his study and reached for the paper wrap in his drawer. His hand was trembling slightly. At Miami Port, in front of the Ocean Princess, cruise staff were neatly lined up waiting for guests. As 11 a.m. passed, the temperature gradually rose. The August sun in Florida blazed mercilessly, heating the metal handrails on the pier to an untouchable temperature. Eva, Abby, no running. Jonathan Harris's wife, Kate, admonished their excited daughters, ages 8 and 5, who could hardly contain their excitement at the sight of the pure white luxury cruise ship. "Daddy, is that ship just for us?" Eva looked up at her father with sparkling eyes. Jonathan, a local public middle school history teacher, managed a gentle smile. The lavish trip prepared by his sister Alexandra felt somewhat uncomfortable to him. "Yes, let's spend a wonderful time together eating Grandma's cooking." At that moment, a luxury car smoothly arrived at the pier. When the driver stepped out and opened the door, Mary and Charles emerged. The driver carefully began unloading boxes filled with cooking equipment from the trunk. "Mom, let the staff handle those boxes." Alexandra appeared briskly, directing the staff. Her perfect makeup and the fine white linen dress she wore made her look as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. However, she barely glanced at the boxes containing her mother's homemade food before starting to check her emails on her smartphone. "Alexandra, try to forget work for once," Mary advised, but it seemed her words did not reach her daughter. Once inside, the staff led the party to the top-floor suite area. Thick carpets lined the hallways, glittering chandeliers, and elegant Art Deco decorations, all seemed to narrate Alexandra's success. "Where's Michael?" Jonathan asked, to which Alexandra replied in a businesslike tone. "A young doctor fell ill in the ER, and he had to fill in. He should be here by departure." Jonathan smiled, remembering his old friend's meticulous nature. They had studied on the same campus during college and witnessed significant moments in each other's lives. It was actually he who had introduced Michael and Alexandra. Meanwhile, unnoticed by anyone, Joshua was moving quietly through the ship, using service corridors and avoiding attention. He was trying to get closer to the kitchen. The luxurious interior of the ship was a world apart from its glamorous facade. Narrow corridors, bustling staff, and the smell of cooking wafting from the kitchen. Guided by this scent, Joshua moved further inside. "This looks good." Joshua found a small storage space behind the kitchen, hidden behind shelves stacked with cooking equipment and dishes. He could observe without being noticed. Lunch preparations were already underway in the kitchen. Voices of chefs could be heard. And down the corridor leading to the main kitchen, staff passed by carrying recognizable boxes. That box. Joshua held his breath. The elderly man he had seen on the pier, Charles, entered the kitchen. After looking around, he took out a small container from his pocket and hid it behind some kitchen equipment. Joshua's eyes sharpened. Intuitively, he felt something bad was about to happen. Upstairs in the dining room, Alexandra was giving work instructions over the phone. Mary, concerned about her daughter's workaholic tendencies, watched her with worry and headed to the kitchen. Charles had already returned and sat down as if nothing had happened. Jonathan and his family were gazing at the sea from the deck. The Miami skyline shimmered in the summer haze. "Hey, Daddy, I want to eat Grandma's cooking soon." Abby tugged at her father's hand. Jonathan smiled and nodded, but he felt a sense of unease. Was it due to his sister's excessively luxurious tastes? Or something else. The afternoon sunlight streamed into the ship, casting long shadows on the kitchen floor. Blending into these shadows, Joshua quietly hid. His eyes were fixed on the spot where Charles had hidden something. In the main kitchen of the ship, Mary was carefully arranging her brought cooking tools. Among the busy professional chefs, she organized her workspace. "Would it be possible to reheat this meatloaf for me?" Mary politely spoke to the head chef, who quickly agreed, given that she was the mother of the successful entrepreneur hosting this private cruise. "Yes, of course. Feel free to use the oven. And for finishing the gravy sauce, please use this stove." On the counter were dishes Mary had prepared since morning. The meatloaf that just needed reheating, boiled potatoes for making mashed potatoes, and the key lime pie. Each dish was filled with memories of the Harris family. "I used to cook with Alexandra in the kitchen a lot in the past." Mary began nostalgically while mashing the boiled potatoes. This mashed potato, she was so serious about just mashing potatoes, as if she were practicing piano. But now, her voice fell slightly. Nearby, young staff listened intently to her words. "This is a recipe I learned from my mother. Just a little sour cream is the key to these mashed potatoes." As Mary continued talking, Joshua hid in the shadows behind the kitchen, his eyes tracking Charles's movements. The spot where he had hidden something earlier was bothering him. Charles re-entered the kitchen. Seeing Mary absorbed in her cooking, he casually walked over to the gravy sauce. "Need help?" "Thank you, but I'm fine." Charles nodded lightly to his wife's response, then reached into the shadow of the counter and pulled out a small container. While checking his surroundings, he quickly mixed its contents into the gravy sauce. Joshua's eyes widened. "It's almost time for dinner, isn't it?" The head chef spoke up. Mary nodded happily. "Yes, this meatloaf has been a staple for special days since my daughter was little. We've had fewer opportunities to eat together recently." At that moment, Alexandra's voice came from the dining room. "Mom, are you ready?" "Yes, just about." Mary took the meatloaf out of the oven. The savory aroma filled the kitchen. It was perfectly cooked, and the juices were seeping out just right. "The gravy sauce has warmed up too," Charles called out. A dark shadow seemed to linger on his face. "I'll carry it. And I'll slice the meatloaf too." "Thank you. You've really taken an interest in cooking, haven't you?" Mary was pleased with her husband's offer. However, Joshua, hidden in the shadows, felt a sense of crisis at the scene. The powder Charles had mixed into the gravy sauce was undoubtedly. In the dining room, the whole family was seated. Michael had arrived from the hospital just in time and was sitting next to Alexandra. Eva and Abby were puffing their chests with anticipation for their grandmother's cooking. Jonathan was quietly listening to his sister talk about work. About Grandma's cooking, Abby spoke to Eva, who was sitting next to her. "Mommy said it's a treasure of our family from long ago." As her words echoed in the luxurious dining room, the fateful dish was about to be served in the kitchen. Nearby, Joshua was facing a moment of decision. The dining room on the luxury cruise ship was enveloped in the soft light of early evening. The crystal chandelier elegantly shone from the ceiling, and the deep blue sea was visible through the large windows. The tables were set perfectly with pristine white linen tablecloths. Polished silver cutlery lined up, and glasses catching the light and sparkling. Alexandra was scrolling through her smartphone, unable to let it go. Unaccustomed to waiting, she seemed irritated. by the delay in her mother's cooking arriving. "The aroma is getting strong, isn't it?" she said absent-mindedly. Michael looked at his wife's profile and sighed quietly. Her high-handed attitude throughout the day had troubled him. Since boarding, Alexandra had been making stringent demands of the staff. Her attitude weighed on him. "Alexandra, at least during the meal." Jonathan gently spoke to his sister, trying to reason with her in the same calm tone he used with his students. Alexandra lifted her face slightly, clearly displeased. "I know. But I'm in the final stages of an important deal right now." Her words sounded like an excuse. Eva and Abby, as their mother had taught them, sat with their napkins properly spread on their laps. However, they seemed slightly frightened by their aunt's demeanor. At that moment, Charles appeared with a silver vessel of gravy sauce, followed by Mary carrying the large meatloaf. The girls let out small cheers. The savory aroma spread throughout the room. "Oh, what a lovely smell!" Kate exclaimed happily. Mary smiled proudly. It was a masterpiece born from years of experience. Charles took the knife and began to slice the meatloaf. His movements bore the remnants of his days running a restaurant. "I'll serve everyone," he said with unusual zeal. He ladled plenty of gravy sauce over each slice of meatloaf on the plates. He took particular care with Alexandra's plate, his actions showing a somewhat unnatural obsession. "I always take photos of the dishes at business lunches. Maybe I should take one today too," Alexandra said. Unusually, she took her eyes off her work and aimed her smartphone's camera at the food. Michael realized that it wasn't about sharing a real family moment and sighed again. That was the moment. "Don't eat it," a sharp young voice echoed from the direction of the kitchen. Everyone turned in surprise as a boy emerged from the shadows. His oversized t-shirt was faded, with threads fraying in places. His jeans were worn at the knees, and his shoes were thin-soled. His thin frame suggested he hadn't been eating well. And although his cheeks were hollow, his brown eyes were remarkably intelligent and serious. His slightly long black hair seemed only to be combed through with his fingers, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Especially you, Alexandra, you mustn't eat that meatloaf." "What did you say?" Alexandra raised her voice. "Why is a child like this?" "Butler." Her tone was cold and commanding. Michael frowned at his wife's attitude. The dedicated butler appeared nearby, along with 2 staff members. Charles's face stiffened, and he desperately tried to control his trembling hands. "Stay calm." Jonathan stood up and approached the boy. His teacher's instinct sensed the desperation in the boy's actions. "Why are you here?" I saw it," the boy said, his voice trembling, but his eyes were filled with resolve. "That man?" He tried to point at Charles, but at that moment, the butler and 2 staff members approached the boy. "Wait!" the boy cried out desperately. Eva and Abby, startled by the sudden event, clung to their father's back. "He put something in the gravy sauce." "Brown powder." Charles's face went pale, but no one noticed the change. Mary looked at her husband with a confused expression. "What are you saying? Are you trying to ruin my mother's cherished recipe?" Alexandra was openly furious. Her voice carried the arrogance of her success. "No, that's not it. It's true." But by then, 2 staff members had already grabbed the boy by his arms. Michael was disturbed by the staff's rough handling. As a doctor who never forgot his duty to the vulnerable, He felt uncomfortable with the way his wife was giving orders. Why was he allowed on board? What about security? Alexandra was sharply questioning the butler. Her demeanor was the imperious one that her husband always worried about. Meanwhile, she unconsciously picked up a fork and began to bring the meatloaf to her mouth. It smells different, a savory scent. She took a bite. As he was being dragged out from behind the scenes, the boy continued to shout desperately, "Stop! Don't eat it!" His voice echoed off the luxurious dining room's ceiling and faded away. The light from the chandelier ominously reflected off the surface of the gravy sauce on Alexandra's plate. No one yet realized that this voice was a desperate attempt to save lives. "I'm really sorry. I'll call security right away." As the butler started to speak while bowing his head, a small cough escaped from Alexandra's throat. "Alexandra?" Michael's instinct as a doctor sensed something was off. His wife's face was slightly flushed. "I'm fine, just a little." Alexandra cut off her words. She put her hand to her neck and struggled to breathe. Suddenly, she began to cough violently. "Alexandra." Mary stood up from her chair. Charles also looked worried as he approached his daughter. "It's nuts. The gravy sauce has nut powder in it." The desperate cries of the shabbily dressed boy were not taken seriously by anyone. To them, the immediate events unfolding were more pressing than the words of a boy who looked like he might be sleeping on the streets. "What?" Charles raised his voice in a shaken manner. "I would never add anything unnecessary to Mary's cherished recipe." His words seemed genuine, and in the chaos, everyone seemed inclined to nod in agreement. Charles, while perfectly playing the role of a concerned father, discreetly approached a window and dropped a small spice container into the waves. "It's an anaphylactic reaction." Michael immediately understood the situation. While checking his wife's pulse, he shouted to the butler, "Call the ship's doctor and get the emergency kit, now." His voice was a mix of professional calm and the urgency of a husband. "Mom, I can't breathe." Alexandra's voice was growing fainter. Her face was turning pale. Her lips were tinged with blue, and she was sweating profusely with trembling limbs. Her blood pressure is dropping rapidly. Michael continued to check her symptoms calmly, his experience in the ER supporting him through this critical situation. "I should have an EpiPen in my bag." Alexandra managed to get the words out. Eva and Abby, hugged by their mother, looked at their aunt with frightened faces. Michael searched his wife's bag and found the EpiPen. "It's okay, Alexandra. You'll feel better soon." He skillfully removed the cap of the EpiPen and administered the injection into her thigh. His movements showed his trained expertise. "She needs oxygen as well." The ship's doctor arrived and immediately provided an oxygen mask. Michael monitored his wife's breathing while giving calm instructions. "Request a medevac. With these symptoms, she needs immediate advanced treatment." The butler began contacting emergency services immediately. Alexandra's breathing became a bit more stable thanks to the oxygen mask. In the midst of the chaos, Joshua was still being restrained, desperately trying to convey the truth. However, his voice reached no one. Charles continued his perfect act as a concerned father, while looking outside the window, where no evidence remained. At that moment, Jonathan approached Joshua. Perhaps his instincts as a teacher sensed something in the boy's demeanor. "What did you see?" Jonathan asked quietly. But the answer to his question was drowned out by the sound of the emergency helicopter's rotors. The distress signal sent from the luxury cruise ship blinked red against the twilight sky. The emergency center at Miami General Hospital was bustling as dusk approached. The medevac helicopter landed on the helipad, and a medical team surrounded Alexandra's stretcher. 35-year-old female, anaphylactic shock. Administered EpiPen. Blood pressure 80/50, pulse 120. Michael reported concisely to his colleagues. Normally a doctor treating others, he was now a husband accompanying his patient wife. There's a possibility of a secondary reaction. Prepare the ICU. The chief resident issued instructions. Alexandra, still conscious but breathing heavily with an oxygen mask, looked weak. Michael. She weakly gripped her husband's hand. It's okay. This hospital is my workplace. You will receive the best treatment here. While being rushed to the emergency room, doctors were giving orders for tests one after another. A venous line was secured, and monitors were attached. Meanwhile, in the hospital lobby, Mary was filling out admission forms with trembling hands. Charles sat silently next to her, his expression unreadable. Mom? Jonathan approached. He had left his children with his wife and accompanied her to the hospital. The police are coming. They think there might be a criminal element to this. Mary's hand paused. A criminal element. Charles's face stiffened. However, no one noticed. At that moment, two men dressed in light linen jackets typical of a Miami summer, one wearing a light shirt, entered the hospital lobby. The older one showed a police badge as he quietly approached Mary. A shoulder holster was slightly visible under the thin fabric. The younger one hung an ID case around his neck and took out a notebook. The older detective quietly approached Mary. Mrs. Harris. We understand your daughter is stabilized. If it's all right, we would like to ask you a few questions. Mary looked at her husband with a puzzled expression. Charles managed a calm reply. Of course, we will cooperate. The younger detective began to take notes about the incident on the ship. The boy mentioned that something might have been mixed into the gravy sauce. Impossible, Mary shook her head. It's a family recipe passed down from my mother. Charles just helped me with it. The detectives showed interest in Charles's background in restaurant management. However, at that moment, no one thought it held significant meaning. In the hallway outside the ICU, Jonathan faced Michael. Michael, I think we need to talk about this. Jonathan quietly began to explain Joshua's situation in a quick whisper. How the boy had lost his mother, escaped abuse from his stepmother, and despite living on the streets, had retained his intelligence and integrity as recognized by Jonathan, a teacher. When Joshua returned from having a light meal in the cafeteria, Michael saw him with new eyes. Your courage saved Alexandra's life, Michael said with a serious expression. But no one believed me. I believe you. The police will start a thorough investigation. Michael took keys out of his pocket. Here are the keys to my apartment near the hospital. You should stay there for a while. I'm going to fetch some clothes and show you the place. Joshua looked at the keys in disbelief. For someone who had been living on the streets, the offer of a safe place to live was beyond his imagination. As the night deepened, the view from the ICU's window spread across Miami. Alexandra, receiving in 4, fell into a quiet sleep. Michael sat by her side, holding her hand tightly. Meanwhile, Charles was making a phone call at the back of the hospital. As he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression gradually darkened. The news that the spice container he had thrown from the ship had drifted to an unexpected location caused cold sweat to form on his forehead. Michael's apartment was just a 5-minute walk from the hospital. It was a white, 7-story building, home to many healthcare workers. Known for its 24-hour security and emergency response system. You can take a shower. I have some clean clothes for you here. Michael handed Joshua new t-shirts and sweatpants. The living room had simple furniture and almost no signs of daily life. Mainly used as a place to sleep due to his irregular ER shifts. Thank you. Joshua tentatively stepped into the room. The smell of clean towels and the feel of the soft sofa felt luxurious to him. I'll get changed and head back to the hospital. There's food in the fridge. Help yourself to anything you like, Michael said as he headed to the bedroom. Despite his concern for his wife's condition, he felt compelled not to leave the boy alone. After taking a shower, Joshua looked like a different person. His face was clean, though still youthful, and his eyes held a mature intelligence. Michael. Joshua's expression suddenly became serious. Really, there was something in that gravy sauce. I know, Michael responded quietly. I believe your words. Just then, Michael's phone rang. It was from the hospital. Is Alexandra's condition worse? Joshua asked anxiously. No, it's just a routine update. After hanging up, Michael placed his hand on Joshua's shoulder. You made a tough decision today. And it was the right one. Tears glistened in the boy's eyes. But Alexandra. She will understand eventually. It might take some time though. Michael finished getting dressed and picked up his bag. I'm leaving the keys with you. I'll come back in the morning to check on things. Call this number if you run into any trouble. He left a note with his contact information on the table. Am I really allowed to stay here? Yes. You've earned it. You saved my wife's life. After Michael left, Joshua stood by the window, looking out over the night lights of Miami. The shining street lights looked like beacons of hope to him. Joshua, who had slept in a safe place for the first time in a long while, woke up with the sunrise. After taking a shower and eating a warm meal, his face seemed to regain some of its gentleness as he finally began to feel at ease. In the morning, Michael, who had returned home to prepare to go back to the hospital, watched as Jonathan, who had brought breakfast, was talking with Joshua. Drawing from his experience as a teacher, Jonathan sensed that Joshua wanted to talk about something. My father was wealthy, Joshua began quietly. But everything changed after my mother passed away from illness. My father remarried quickly and started staying away from home for work. My new mother. The boy paused for a moment. She abused me. My father must have known, but he did nothing. Michael stopped what he was doing to listen. As a teacher, I can't ignore children in such situations, Jonathan later confided to Michael. But there's something special about Joshua. That sparkle in his eyes, his intelligence, and his resilience. Yes, Michael nodded. I made the right decision to let him stay in this apartment. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Alexandra had regained consciousness. My work, the computer, she said with a raspy voice through the oxygen mask. Rest now, Mary advised gently. But, the deadline. Alexandra, Mary's voice grew stern unusually. You almost died. At those words, Alexandra's eyes widened. For the first time, she truly felt the fragility of her own life. Late at night, the full moon was visible from the hospital room window. Alexandra reflected on her mother's words. Perhaps she had lost sight of something important beyond her work. Those thoughts gently stirred in her mind. The Miami morning brought gentle sunlight into the hospital room. On the third day of her hospitalization, Alexandra's condition had gradually stabilized. "Good morning." Joshua entered the room, accompanied by Michael. The boy looked remarkably different from when they first met. He was clean. His hair neatly done, and most importantly, his expression had regained a sense of reassurance. "You were, from that time?" Alexandra said, removing her oxygen mask. Her voice was still weak, but her eyes were clear. "Yes. I'm sorry for sneaking onto the ship. Please, have a seat." Alexandra gestured to a chair next to the bed. Michael stood a little distance away, watching over them. "Why were you on that ship?" "I was looking for something to eat." Joshua began to speak, his eyes fixed on the floor. He talked about his memories with his mother, his father's changes, the abuse from his stepmother, and his life on the streets. His words were quiet but carried weight. "My mother loved cooking," the boy's voice brightened a bit. "Meatloaf was especially my favorite. She always said, 'Cooking is love made visible.'" Alexandra gasped. Those words touched something deep within her. "I used to enjoy helping my mother cook when I was a child too." She found herself speaking almost involuntarily. Memories she had long forgotten quietly resurfacing. "When we made mashed potatoes, it was my job to mash them." "Me too." Joshua's eyes lit up. "My mom would say, it's all about how much strength you use." "Yes, too much or too little can make it too sticky." They both said at the same time and shared a spontaneous smile. "I had forgotten," Alexandra's voice softened. "I didn't realize cooking could connect hearts like this." At that moment, the door to the hospital room opened, and two detectives entered. "Ms. Moreno, are you able to speak?" The older detective spoke. Alexandra nodded slightly. "We found the spice container you threw from the ship. It was caught in a fisherman's net. Although the container was immersed in seawater, we found clear fingerprints inside the sealed lid." The younger detective produced a clear bag with the evidence. It was a high-end spice exclusive from a specialty store, with a double-sealed cap. The fingerprints inside were perfectly preserved. Matching the prints, we found they belonged to Charles Collins. Additionally, his credit card records show he purchased peanut powder the day before the incident. Alexandra paled as Michael squeezed her hand. During the interrogation, his complex grievances came to light. The detective continued quietly. "His once glamorous restaurant business failed, and he saw your success as a symbol of the unfairness of the world. He also sent multiple malicious emails to your company from several accounts over the past month and attempted to purchase poison." "Why?" Alexandra's voice trembled. "Mr. Collins expressed a desire for revenge against the successful, fueled by your mother's reluctance to cater to his lavish demands." Tears streamed down Alexandra's face as she remembered her mother, who was deeply saddened by the news. "Charles Collins has been arrested on charges of attempted murder and assault," the detective concluded. "The prosecution has already decided to proceed." A heavy silence fell over Alexandra's hospital room. Before being taken into custody, he confessed everything. The younger detective added, "It was a premeditated act aimed at your life, likely to result in a prison sentence." After the detectives left, the hospital room was enveloped in silence again. "My mother, to think she suffered so much." Alexandra's voice trembled. Joshua spoke softly. "Your mother is strong, I can tell," he continued with a serious gaze. "People who truly love always find a way to recover. That's what my mom taught me." Alexandra stared at the boy. She could see the strength of a soul that had overcome hardships. For the first time, she felt like she could see what was truly important beyond her career and success. Outside the window, the summer clouds flowed quietly. It seemed like the peaceful beginning of a new family story. 2 days before her discharge, the Miami sunset filtered into Alexandra's hospital room. Mary sat alone by her daughter's side. "Mom, come live with us," Alexandra said, her usual iciness gone from her voice. "Well, Michael agrees too. We have plenty of room at our house. And," Alexandra took her mother's hand, "I want to spend more time with family." Tears shone in Mary's eyes. She felt the warmth and kindness from her daughter's hand. "But it's not your fault what Charles did," Alexandra asserted firmly. "You're a victim too." They looked at each other in silence for a long time, their hearts healing in the quiet. "Alexandra," Mary started quietly, "I want to cook that meal again. But this time, without nuts?" Alexandra smiled, quickly understanding her mother's intent. "Yes. Let's create a new tradition for the Harris family." At that moment, the door to the room quietly opened. Jonathan and Joshua entered, the boy carrying textbooks. "Oh, were you studying?" Mary asked. Jonathan smiled warmly. "I'm helping Joshua plan for medical school in the long term." "Were you studying late last night too?" Jonathan gently admonished. "Yes, but it's okay. Medical books are fascinating. Especially the circulatory system," Joshua began excitedly. "The way the electrical system of the heart travels. From the sinoatrial node through the atrioventricular node to the Purkinje fibers. Arrhythmias can also be explained by abnormalities in this conduction system." The adults in the room looked surprised at the boy's explanation. He used technical terms precisely, and his understanding was clearly beyond a middle school level. "Honestly, I'm amazed," Jonathan explained to Alexandra. "He's already mastered regular middle school science and is now self-studying high school level biology. His learning ability is extremely high. And," Jonathan continued proudly, "he scored well enough on a mock test recently that skipping grades is definitely possible. I've never seen such a talented student before. I want to become a doctor who can help people," Joshua said with determination in his voice. "For that, I still need to study a lot. I'm borrowing textbooks on basic medicine from the library. But," the boy looked down, "with my background." "Wait." Alexandra sat up. A light of decision shone in her eyes. After a moment of silence, she slowly began. "Joshua, don't give up on your dream of becoming a doctor." Joshua looked up. Alexandra continued, looking out the window from her bed. "Wanting to help people, that desire is very precious." She found new meaning in her words, sensing a quiet shift in what she had always pursued as success. "Mom?" Alexandra turned back to Mary. "Let's live together in our new home." And she paused, taking a deep breath. The circumstances she heard about from Michael and Joshua's pure dream had coalesced into a firm decision in her heart. As the sunset turned the hospital room red, a new family structure was quietly but surely forming. Late that night, quiet moonlight streamed into Alexandra's hospital room. When Michael returned to the room after his shift, his wife was still awake. Can't sleep? Yes. Michael, I need to talk to you. Alexandra's voice had a softness different from her usual firmness. It's about Joshua. Michael sat down beside his wife. After a nurse checked the four and left, they faced each other quietly. He's very intelligent. Alexandra's eyes sparkled. He has a deep understanding of medicine and, above all, a pure heart. Yes. I heard from Jonathan too. He has the academic ability to skip grades. Michael smiled gently. I've noticed it too. Every time he comes to the hospital. He's deeply absorbed in medical books. Michael. Alexandra paused as if searching for the right words. I've been thinking about making him part of our family. Alexandra's voice was soft and slightly embarrassed. Alexandra's voice trembled slightly. Michael gently squeezed her hand. I've been thinking the same. Really? Yes. After spending these last few days with Joshua, I've realized he needs a family. And Michael paused, searching for the right words. I think we need this new kind of family, too. Tears welled up in Alexandra's eyes. I've been wrong about everything until now. Her voice was quiet but filled with strong conviction. I thought money and success were everything in life. But they're not. It's the bonds of family that are the real wealth. I've finally realized that. Michael was moved by his wife's transformation. Her soft expression was something he had never seen before, radiating with the glow of a new life's beginning. Let's talk to Joshua about it tomorrow, Michael suggested. His feelings matter, too. The next morning, as the sunlight streamed into the hospital room, Joshua came for a visit. Good morning, Joshua. Alexandra greeted him warmly. Michael stood beside the boy. We have something important to discuss with you. Joshua looked at them nervously. Would you like to be our child? The room fell silent at Alexandra's words. Joshua's eyes widened. Really? His voice trembled. Joshua, Michael spoke gently. Let's fulfill your dream together. The dream of becoming a doctor. Tears streamed down Joshua's cheeks. But you saved my life, Alexandra said quietly. And you saved my heart. Now we want to support your life. Joshua nodded silently, his small gesture entrusting the beginning of a new family. Outside, the sky over Miami was unusually clear. When Alexandra was discharged 2 weeks after the incident, the Miami summer sun was still strong. But a refreshing breeze blew through her heart. The kitchen of their luxurious home was filled with the scent of Mary's cooking. A meatloaf, made from a new recipe that used no nuts, was slowly baking in the oven. Can I help? Joshua peeked in. Mary felt a warmth in her heart as she accepted her grandson's offer. Yes, I'm about to make mashed potatoes. Oh, in that case. Joshua's eyes lit up. My mom taught me a method. They began cooking together cheerfully, while Alexandra watched from the living room sofa. Her laptop lay open beside her. I'm planning a major shift in the company's direction. Turning to Michael, Alexandra said quietly. Starting a social responsibility division, focusing on support for children from underprivileged backgrounds, especially those aspiring to careers in healthcare. Michael looked at his wife's determined face as she continued. And about your suggestion? The free clinic? Yes. The company will fully support it. We'll provide a site downtown. Michael smiled, sensing a significant change in his wife. "This morning, I found something interesting," he mentioned, glancing towards Joshua. "There were detailed notes written in my medical books. The analysis of cases was incredibly accurate." "Joshua, you've been studying on your own?" "Yes. The path to medical school is long, but with him." Laughter came from the kitchen. Mary and Joshua were talking as they cooked. "Mom's also become much brighter." "Yes. We're beginning to see the shape of our new family." At dusk, the family gathered around the dining table. The meatloaf and mashed potatoes Mary and Joshua had made were at the center. "What a wonderful smell!" Everyone chimed in, and Alexandra felt quietly happy. In the past, she might have found such ordinary times boring. But now, everything was different. "The cooking of Mom and Joshua is delicious." Alexandra nodded with a smile. A new tradition for the Harris family was starting. After dinner, Joshua opened a medical book and began a lively discussion with Michael. Mary smiled peacefully as she cleaned up in the kitchen. And Alexandra realized for the first time what true success was. A year after the incident, as another Miami summer began, Joshua was attending a middle school that offered supplementary morning classes. "Could you explain how to solve this problem again?" one of the students staying late in the classroom asked Joshua. Maintaining top grades, he had also volunteered to tutor friends who struggled with math. "Here, you use the properties of quadratic functions." Joshua's explanation was as clear as a teacher's. Although there was talk of skipping grades, he had chosen to take each step firmly, valuing a normal school life. "Joshua, you're amazing," the student exclaimed. "Not just in math, but you're also great at science. You were like a teacher during the last experiment." "That's nothing," Joshua answered a bit shyly. "Well, to get into medical school, you have to be able to do at least this much." "There goes your serious face again," laughed a classmate. "But hey, we're playing basketball in the park after school today. Want to come? Let's hang out." "Yeah, I think I can make it for a bit if we finish early." The voices of a few classmates remained in the classroom, discussing plans for the weekend. Balancing study and play. Joshua was living the life of a normal middle school student while walking towards his dream. Meanwhile, significant changes were underway at Alexandra's company. "The launch of the new department is complete," reported the secretary. "Here are the budget proposal and details for the social contribution and medical support programs." Alexandra reviewed the documents with a gentle smile. Her company was now starting to provide substantial support to underprivileged children. A new free clinic had opened 15 minutes by car from Miami General Hospital. Michael was there 2 days a week, treating patients. "Thank you, doctor," said a mother from a poor family, expressing her gratitude. Michael smiled kindly, fulfilling a long-held dream with this clinic. Mary also began a new activity. She was teaching cooking classes at a community center, especially helping single mothers and economically challenged families to prepare nutritious meals within their budgets. "Mrs. Harris's recipes are a lifesaver," a young single mother said. "My kids love the meals." Mary's cooking class became more than just a place to learn culinary skills, it was a place to share wisdom about strengthening family bonds. One weekend, at a family dinner where everyone gathered, Joshua had some exciting news. "I won first place in a national science contest." "Congratulations," everyone cheered. "What was your research topic?" Michael asked. "It was about the mechanisms of allergic reactions." Joshua replied, blushing slightly. I focused especially on how EpiPens work. Tears welled up in Alexandra's eyes, moved by how the incident that had sparked Joshua's interest in medicine had deepened his pursuit. Are you up for volunteering at the clinic tomorrow? Michael asked. Joshua nodded strongly. That weekend afternoon, Joshua helped with basic tasks at the clinic's reception and even entertained young patients. He was taking firm steps toward his dream of becoming a doctor. We've changed, haven't we? Alexandra remarked to Michael. But maybe this is what true happiness is. In the living room, Mary was teaching Joshua some cooking tips. The new family structure was bringing undeniable happiness. 10 years later. The streets of Miami had gradually changed over the decade. But the warmth in the Harris home remained constant. Daddy, are you at the hospital today? Asked the twin boys, aged 7. Rushing up to Michael. They were used to seeing their father in scrubs. Yes. It's a special day. Michael smiled. Your big brother is starting his clinical rotation. Joshua, now 20, had completed 2 years of basic medical education at medical school after accelerating his education and entering college at 16. He was about to start his clinical training. Good morning, everyone. Alexandra entered the kitchen. Her once sharp demeanor had softened into a warm and caring presence. Her company was now known for balancing the beauty business with social contributions. Did you see the news this morning? Michael asked. Over 100 students who received scholarships from your program have graduated from medical school. Over 50 of them are now doctors. Alexandra nodded with joy. Joshua was also a beneficiary of this program. He'll be a doctor in 2 more years. In the kitchen, Mary was preparing breakfast as usual. Her cooking classes had become nationally popular, particularly her free courses for economically struggling families. Good morning, everyone. Joshua appeared. He was not yet wearing a white coat, but he already exuded the demeanor of a young doctor. Are you nervous? Alexandra asked, looking at her son. A bit, he admitted honestly. But this is my dream. Big brother, next time let us listen to heartbeats too. One of the twins exclaimed. Of course. But first. Joshua laughed as he lifted his brother. We need to eat Grandma's breakfast properly. The breakfast table was laden with lovingly prepared dishes. The new recipe for meatloaf was now a popular item even in the hospital cafeteria. Remember? Mary said quietly. That summer day, 10 years ago. Everyone nodded silently. That event had profoundly changed their lives, steering them towards undeniable happiness. Let's go. Michael stood up. I've been looking forward to working in the same hospital with my son. I'll come with you part of the way. Alexandra said. Today is also the launch day for a new program at the free clinic. Outside, the Miami sunrise was dazzlingly bright. A new day was beginning. And with it, a new chapter for this family was unfolding.